what are we doing in the black community? The number one consumer of a Mercedes-Benz
It's us.
us. The number one consumer of a Gucci and a Louis Vuitton, us. And they don't even advertise. Why is it that in the black community, we are always the number one consumer, but we're not the number one creators?
So you just said it, the fact that there's consumers and creators. For so long, we assume success based on consumption.
Welcome back to Closing the Gap, the truth about black wealth. Of course, I'm back here and we're going to pick up where we left off with my man, Pastor Eddie Richardson. And I'm grateful and thankful and blessed to have him in the building today, and definitely blesses us with some wisdom and some information and some knowledge that we can all, take and utilize in our own personal lives. And, we're going to kind of jump back into it. And, what was the process of how you went about, building that trust and faith in God from a foundational aspect in your day-to-day life?
Well, like I said, it was instilled in me, in my family and at home. But then after becoming an adult and getting married, my wife also had it in her. And so it was us joining together and beginning to humble ourselves before God. And then me being vulnerable enough to share with her, my own insecurities. Right. And that actually helped me become stronger as a man of God. And so if I will say that, those are things that I know we're on the Closing the Gap podcast about wealth, but even before that, we had to close gaps in our relationship, because gaps in our relationship led to gaps in our finances at home. And so that's what I realized is reflecting on from where I am now to how I was raised. And I realized that the more that my family joined in to pray together, that it made the foundation solid, right? And so I know I'm juxtaposing the wealth gap and the spiritual gap, but I do believe that you have to have a solid foundation so that you don't have any leakage.
Well, no, I mean, I agree 110%. And, I'm almost one of those people that, we talk about a lot, obviously, here, and people always talking about we're closing the gap and it's a wealth gap, but for me, I'm speaking about it constantly. The biggest gap I feel like we have is a trust gap. And that's what leads, and I feel like has led to the wealth gap for African Americans, because we're not together because we're not as trusting. And one thing I'm real big about is, from a pastor and a person that I listen to, I believe that I can see God in you before I can hear God from you. So for me, your presence and your walk and the way you carry yourself, I can see God in you. So it allows me to listen to you, because I have a very discerning spirit. I've always had a strong spirit of discernment where I can see BS. I can hear, I can kind of, see it from a mile away. So for me, it's always been important, which is why it's always gave me that, I feel like a leg up in certain situations, because I do take the time to kind of hear from God. And God is what obviously is giving me that spirit of discernment to be able to decipher from, what advice do I need to take? What should I do? What shouldn't I do? By taking that into account. And I think, one of the best things that you said, and I think, things we need to get back to is what's been lost in, our community as a whole is, train up a child in the way that he should go. That for me, if everything you said, it takes me back to, my upbringing and, train up a child in the way that he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. You're pointing back to that. Every time we're bringing that back to light, and that's something that we have to continue to pass on. And you're doing with your kids by them seeing you praying together. That's allowing them. And they say, well, look, if dad listens to God, if dad listens to mom, he listens to us, why shouldn't we listen to him? So it makes it easier for everybody to listen if the head is setting the example of being a listener. And I think that's something that's been lost. I think something that, as obviously as black men, we can probably do a better job of, in all aspects. That's in our family aspect and even professional aspects. And that's why I feel like the loss of that has led to a greater wealth gap. Because if you're not listening to your wife, if you're not listening to God, I'm gonna be hard pressed to believe that you can listen to me. You know what I'm saying? So if you can listen to them, and those should be the most important. God first and your wife second should be the most important, voices that you hear. Well, if you're not taking into account what they're saying and hearing them, I don't really expect you to be able to fully grasp what's coming out of my mouth, because you're not hearing the most important voices. Right. So I think that's a big step, and something that you kind of what I've been hearing within your message is that we just need to have more of a listening ear and be willing to listen. And like I said, continue to humble ourselves too. And just, I think, simple as put, asking God to speak to you. Yeah. And I've been there personally where you're in a place in your life when you just, you got a lot of noise going on. You just got to sit down. Mm-hmm. You just got to sit still, just be still. And anytime I see a lot of chaos going on, for me, I just say, I just need to sit still because God's trying to tell me something. And I can't hear him with a lot of stuff going on. So, I think that's big, and think something that we can all take, into account and be better about. And tell me, I'm always curious, as a, coming from a pastor, obviously, what are things that you feel like, we as fathers could be doing? One thing I took from you already is that, I believe I need to pray more with my family. I need to allow my sons to see me pray more. Being, a little bit more vulnerable. But I think that's what opens up and gives them the freedom maybe to come back and talk to you. They see if you talking to God, then I can talk to you, because I think it's a trickle down effect. So, tell me what are some things you see from from your position, in a pulpit where you're speaking to people and obviously, ministering to people on a day-to-day basis. What is something that you see that we could probably implement that you may do or just have seen work that could be beneficial to us?
The one thing is the vulnerability piece. Right. As men, a lot of times we protect ourselves behind our ego, and try to act like we have everything figured out. Right. But what I realized, now I have daughters. I have three girls, and one is senior this year. And what I've been doing with her now, with her being about to go to college, is sharing a few stories here and there of the mistakes I made and the insecurities I had as a senior in school, where I didn't know where I was going to go to school, right? And how I was in high school, had applied to a couple of colleges, and I was fronting like I was going to this place, but I didn't have financial aid papers filled out. I didn't have a dorm, you know what I'm saying? And then I told this story about, I told the guy where I was working at after graduating from high school. I told him, hey, I'm leaving and going to college in 2 weeks. And he told me, hey, well, don't worry about coming back. Right? You can go ahead and go to college. Now I'm sitting around the house and don't have no college to go to, right? And now I'm out of a job, and I'm just sitting around home. So as men, the more vulnerable we are with our children, families, and with others, that endears others to come to us and willing to share their stories and realize that, hey, where I am now, I wasn't always there. Right. But if I act like I've always been there, then the person that's not there will never be able to get there.
Absolutely.
And so that's a gap that we have to close. You have to, in order to close gaps, right? Closing wealth gaps, closing spiritual gaps, closing gaps as men, closing gaps in our relationships with our children, with our wives, all of these things. You have to back away from it and recognize where the gap is and what caused it, right? All right, you played football, right? You would open gaps for the running back.
That was the goal.
Right. But the running back has to be patient until you do your job.
Absolutely.
Right. So if I say we as men need to be more like offensive linemen, take on the task, right, of laying a good block, opening up a gap for the next generation to come and be able to score the touchdown.
And that's how you close the gap. Welcome back to Closing the Gap, the truth about Black wealth. Of course, I'm your host, Mr. Wilbert Hamilton, owner and founder of Hamilton Wealth Advisors. Here again with Pastor Eddie Richardson, Mr. Omega Psi Phi himself. And we've been having a wonderful time today. I mean, I've been truly been blessed and enriched by his presence. He shared a lot of great information and knowledge and wisdom that I think we all as men can implement into our lives. And women, you're out there, you can take and, share with your husbands or share this video with your husbands so they can, see and partake in this information that's being shared with you today. So one thing I wanted to kind of jump into, and, you're a man who wears many hats. Of course, you're a man who has multiple streams of incomes. You're, mastering several different areas. So, how did you become a good, greater steward of those resources? So, what are the things you put in place to kind of, become a better steward over your house?
Well, I started working in barbershop in Birmingham around 1998. And during that time, I dare say that I was probably living a life of riotous living, as they say. Right? But on Sunday afternoon, my mother would call me, not every Sunday, but just about every Sunday. And she would get on me and say, well, you need to, be better. And she would get on me about paying my tithe. She'd say, hey, you making money, you cutting hair, you're not coming to church like you should. You need to start coming to church and you need to start paying your tithe. Right? And so that started me being more accountable, being a better steward of the money that I was making, because, I was getting cash every day in the barbershop. And every day I was spending cash, right? And so for about a 2 to 4 year period, I really don't know how much money I made. I just know that after eating, drinking, going to the club, going on dates, kicking it with the fellas, that on Sunday afternoon, after my mother would call me and I would count up the money in my nightstand, that I would have $600 to $700. And now, as an adult and realizing the type of things that I was doing, I should have been meeting with somebody like you back then and investing my money right. I would be in a much better position. But that started me to being a better steward of my finances. Was those calls from my mom made me realize how much money I was missing from that I was making, and I started managing it better. And after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can totally agree with that. I remember, and your mom sounds a lot like mine, and mine would get on to me, and one thing she would always say, look, you do everything you want to do Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, you make sure you get up and get God that day.
That's right.
So she would always, even I was in school and I was in college and we'd have a football game, we'd fly in, wouldn't get back to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She said, look, you do everything you want to do Monday through Saturday. On Sunday morning, you get up and make sure you give God his time for giving you the ability to enjoy it Monday through Saturday. So that's one thing I did practice in college, and, by my mom staying on me about it, just saying, look, and it became a habit, and I always made sure, regardless of how I felt after that game on Saturday, well, I was make sure I get up and I would always go to church on Sunday morning. So, that foundation, similar to kind of what you had. And, mama put that mirror in front of your face. That's essentially she putting that mirror in front of you and say, okay, well, what are you doing? I need you to do better. I know you've been taught better. Right. Yeah, I know you know better. Yeah. So, I'm gonna put this mirror in your face until you do better. And having that is a blessing. And that's one of the greatest gifts I feel like I've ever received. Was my parents. Bar none. I think they definitely trained me up. So in times when, like you say, you're in college, and even after college, you make a little money, you enjoy yourself, start enjoying yourself a little bit too much, and you kind of get off track. But you always had that foundation to go back that will check you and just make sure that, hey, you weren't raised like that. What's in you is gonna come back out of you. And, I'm thankful and grateful that I had it, and obviously you had it, and it allowed you to kind of get back on, that path was straight and narrow. And, for me, I'm always curious because, I believe in tithing as well. And, I believe we're all blessed to be a blessing. And, tell me, I guess, your view, I guess, on tithing, because of course you have, mixed opinions and varying opinions. And I know I have an opinion on it, on how you should look at it, and how you shouldn't look at it. But from a pastor, I know you have a certain view as well. And I'm always curious to find out, what is that viewpoint for you?
For me, it's a law of God that I must obey if I'm going to be one of his servants. That's first and foremost, and that's it really, is the fact that God desires it, requires it, and so because of that, I must do it. Now there are some residual effects from being obedient to the laws of God, right? Because God blesses us even when we're disobedient.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I never try to convince somebody to pay their tithes to God so that they can receive something back. Right. That's why I say first and foremost, I do it because it's the law. Right. It's just like, laws that we have in the land. Right. You need to obey it because it's the law of the land. And if I'm submitting myself to the higher authority of God, then I need to be obedient to that. Now, residually, there are some effects that I've seen as a result of being obedient, right? Of being obedient to the law of God. I've seen, residual blessings that come, right, from paying my tithes. I've seen an increase in my lifestyle, not just finances, all right, but I've seen an increase in peace. Joy, things of that nature that you really cannot quantify, right? Just from being obedient to God. And if we tied it into any type of law that you were obedient to, I'm sure anybody can see residual effects. Just following the guidance and the rules of taking care of your vehicle, you see the residual effects of, of things happening good for it, right? Less challenges. Now, sometimes we have challenges that are unannounced.
Life happens,
right?
Absolutely.
We get batteries that die and things of that nature. But, in spite of it all, we count it all joy because we know that God is still in control.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's basically my take of tithing is, number one, mainly, it is the law of God.
Well, absolutely. Well, I agree, wholeheartedly. I always tell people, that have a certain opinion on tithes. And I said, look, one thing I learned early on is that it's not your responsibility to worry about what the church does with your tithes once you give it. It's your responsibility to do your tithing. Let God handle the handler.
That's right.
You just make sure that you are obedient because, like I say, obedience is better than sacrifice.
Yes,
so we can be obedient and follow his laws. We don't have to worry about what happens after, because I think a lot of people try to make the excuse as to why they won't tithe because, I don't want to give money to a church. They're not doing right. I'm like, well, nobody said you had to stay at that church. You can go find another church home. I have varied opinions about, if you don't feel like, if you don't have a church home, there's still ways of going and giving and being a blessing to others. Just because you don't have to go to a church to tithe to a church. I'm very picky about who I receive, my message from, but even though I may not have a church home in a certain place, like when I moved here, I didn't have a church home, but I still made sure I tithe to a church because I wanted to make sure that I was doing what I was supposed to do because, of course, I want to be able to be a blessing because I've been blessed. And I think that's the key to all of it, and I think that's how we should approach it. Be back in a minute.